If you thought your New Year's resolutions were getting derailed, wait until you hear about what's happening with Alberta, separatism, and a president who apparently thinks countries are just items on a shopping list. Welcome to the wildest episode of As Canada Turns that we've had in a while, and trust me, that's saying something. Welcome back to Canadian Insights, where we keep you updated on Canadian politics even when the news makes you want to hide under a blanket and pretend it's still 2019. Today we're talking about Danielle Smith, separatism, and why her little political game of footsie with Alberta independence advocates just went from risky to potentially catastrophic. And yes, I said catastrophic, because when you've got a US president eyeing up other countries' resources like he's browsing a menu at an all-you-can-eat buffet, maybe it's time to stop playing with constitutional fire. So let's set the stage here, because context is everything. While you and I were probably eating too much turkey over the holidays and making promises to ourselves that we'd definitely start going to the gym this year, Danielle Smith was allegedly soaking up some sun at her Panama property, living her best tropical life. And honestly, good for her. Enjoy that vacation, Premier, because when you get back, we need to have a serious conversation about whether flirting with separatism is still the political strategy you want to roll with. Here's the thing. 4 years now, Smith has been doing this delicate dance with the separatist wing of her United Conservative Party. You know the type. Mostly rural, deeply frustrated with Ottawa, convinced that Alberta would be better off going it alone, probably have strong opinions about equalization payments and Trudeau, definitely have strong opinions about Trudeau. Smith has been playing to this crowd, giving them just enough attention to keep them happy, just enough rhetorical red meat to make them feel heard, but never quite committing to the full separation agenda because, that would be completely bananas. But what was maybe a manageable political game when the world was relatively stable has suddenly become a whole different beast. And the beast in question is wearing a red tie, lives in Washington, and apparently thinks international borders are more like suggestions than actual legal boundaries. Enter Donald Trump, stage right, with a foreign policy approach that can best be described as aggressively acquisitive. Let's talk about what Trump's been up to lately, because this is where the alarm bells start ringing so loud you can hear them from Newfoundland to British Columbia. First, the US just rolled into Venezuela and essentially captured their president, Nicolas Maduro. Wild, right? And Trump's been pretty open about the fact that Venezuela's massive oil reserves are part of the appeal. Then he starts making noise about Greenland again, talking about taking it over, completely ignoring Denmark's very reasonable objection that Greenland isn't actually for sale. He's also shown a willingness to blow off NATO allies and their concerns like they're just background noise. The pattern here is pretty clear. This US administration is operating with a mindset that if they want something, and they think they can take it, international law and treaty obligations aren't going to stop them. They're playing civilization on easy mode while everyone else is still trying to follow the rulebook. And if you're sitting in Alberta, which happens to have the third largest oil reserves in the entire world, this should be making you extremely nervous. Because here's the uncomfortable question that we all need to be asking. If Trump thinks Venezuela's oil is worth a military operation, what does he think about Alberta's oil? If he's willing to threaten Greenland's sovereignty for strategic resources, what stops him from getting ideas about Canada's energy sector? And this is where Smith's separatism games go from being a domestic political headache to a potential national security crisis. There's this idea floating around Alberta separatist circles that independence would be great, that Alberta could be its own country, control its own resources, make its own deals, and live happily ever after. It's a nice fantasy. It's also incredibly naive given the current geopolitical situation. Because an independent Alberta wouldn't be a strong, sovereign nation standing tall on the world stage. It would be a landlocked entity with massive resources sitting right next to the world's most powerful military that's currently being run by someone with a demonstrated willingness to ignore international norms. Let me put this in terms that might make the stakes clearer. Imagine you're living in an apartment building. You've got a good setup, decent neighbors, everything works fine. But you've been thinking about moving out and getting your own place. Then you notice that the guy in the house next door has started breaking into other people's homes, claiming their stuff, and nobody's really stopping him. Is that the moment you decide to move out on your own? Or is that maybe the moment you realize that staying in a building with other people, with collective security and mutual support, is actually the smart play? Thomas Lukaszuk, a former Alberta MLA who's now leading the Forever Canada movement, has offered Smith a pretty reasonable off-ramp here. He's basically saying, look, let's have a vote in the legislature on a pro-unity petition. Let's get MLAs on record supporting Alberta staying in Canada. Let's put this separation nonsense to bed before it gets even more dangerous. And honestly, it's hard to argue with the logic here. Smith could easily whip the votes. The NDP would obviously support it. Even chunks of her own UCP caucus would probably be relieved to finally take a clear stand on this. But here's Smith's problem. She spent years courting the separatist wing of her party. She's given them attention, validation, and political oxygen. And now if she suddenly pivots to Team Canada unity, that rural separatist base is going to be furious. They're going to feel betrayed. They're going to make noise. And Smith, like most politicians, really doesn't like making her base angry. But here's the thing. Sometimes leadership means doing the unpopular thing because it's the right thing. Sometimes you have to choose country over party, long-term stability over short-term political convenience. And the stakes here have gotten so much higher than just domestic politics. There's a scenario that experts are now seriously discussing that should terrify anyone who cares about Canadian sovereignty. Picture this. Alberta holds a referendum on independence. Separatists get a massive influx of money, maybe from American sources, maybe grey mega money funding their campaign. The referendum fails, but let's say 30 or 35% vote for separation. That's a minority, but it's a significant minority. And then Trump, being Trump, declares the results fake, claims that actually the majority wanted separation, and says Alberta needs to be liberated from Canadian oppression. Suddenly you've got American troops at the Montana border, and the US is declaring that Alberta should be allowed to join as the 51st state. Sound crazy? Sound like a dystopian political thriller? Well, it's being seriously discussed by people who study this stuff for a living. Thomas Homer Dixon and Adam Gordon laid out exactly this scenario in the Globe and Mail, and honestly, given everything we've seen from Trump, can you really say it's impossible? The man literally tried to buy Greenland. He's now occupying Venezuela. The idea that he'd manufacture a crisis to justify taking control of Alberta's oil isn't science fiction anymore. It's a legitimate geopolitical risk. And here's the kicker. It's not even a coincidence that Alberta separatist leaders have been meeting with Trump administration officials recently. That's not speculation. That's documented. These folks are building relationships with the very administration that represents the biggest threat to Canadian territorial integrity we've faced in generations. If that doesn't set off every red flag imaginable, I don't know what would. This is the moment where Smith needs to look at the bigger picture. Yes, there are legitimate grievances that Alberta has with the federal government. Equalization payments, pipeline politics, environmental regulations that impact the energy sector, all real issues that deserve serious attention. But the solution to those problems isn't independence. The solution definitely isn't independence at a moment when the United States is showing aggressive expansionist tendencies. The solution is working within Canada to address those concerns while maintaining the security and stability that comes with being part of a unified country. The separatists in Smith's party might be loud, but they are not the majority. Most Albertans, when you actually poll them, support staying in Canada. They might be frustrated with Ottawa, they might want changes, but they are not interested in rolling the dice on independence, especially not now. Smith has an opportunity here to show actual leadership, to stand up and say, look, I hear your frustrations, I share many of them, but independence isn't the answer, and given the current global situation, pursuing that path would be dangerous and reckless. But will she take that opportunity? That's the billion-dollar question. Smith has shown throughout her political career that she's willing to play to her base, sometimes at the expense of broader strategic thinking. She's excellent at short-term political tactics but sometimes struggles with long-term consequences. And this is a moment where the long-term consequences of her choices could literally reshape the country. The vacation's over, Premier Smith. The geopolitical landscape has shifted in ways that make your separatist flirtation not just politically questionable but potentially catastrophic. Trump isn't playing games. He's shown he's willing to use military force to secure resources and territory. He's demonstrated that international law means nothing to him. And Alberta, with its massive oil reserves, is exactly the kind of prize that would appeal to his transactional, acquisitive worldview. Canada needs Alberta, and despite what some separatists might think, Alberta needs Canada. We're stronger together, especially when facing a neighbor that's currently being run by someone who views sovereignty as optional. This isn't about political parties or provincial grievances anymore. This is about national survival and making sure that Canada remains a unified, sovereign nation in an increasingly unstable world. So here's hoping that when Smith gets back from Panama, she's had some time to think about the bigger picture. Here's hoping she realizes that the separatist game she's been playing has moved from political theater to genuine danger. And here's hoping she finds the courage to stand up, reject the siren song of independence, and affirm Alberta's commitment to Canada before it's too late. This is Canadian Insights, where we tackle the tough stuff even when it's uncomfortable. If this video made you think, hit that like button. If you want to stay updated on Canadian politics as things continue to get weird, subscribe and ring that bell because we're posting daily. And seriously, drop a comment below. Do you think Smith will pivot to pro-unity messaging, or is she too committed to her separatist base? What would you do if you were in her position? Let's talk about it. And if you made it all the way through this heavy topic, you deserve a medal, or at least a double-double from Tim's. Stay informed, stay engaged, and let's hope our country stays unified. Catch you in the next one.